are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing good, thanks. I had a good night's sleep, so full of vim and vigor.
That's always the most important thing. Now, as a creative mind, let me just take it there for a moment. Don't do you still have those moments where you wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and say, "Yeah, the book is here. I'm ready to rock. I'm excited about this next step of just now giving it to the rest of the world."
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing being an author anyway. You spend a lot of time on your own, cogitating to yourself, and then you flick a switch, and speak to audiences of 200, 300 people about what you've been ruminating over for the last few months and years.
I'm so glad you brought that up because later on today on iHeartRadio, that's going to be my very subject about how creative people are in touch with future readers, future receivers. And it's like, how do we learn to speak that language today so that they receive it 2 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting proposition, I have to say.
But that's the greatest thing about being a creative mind. I mean, like for instance, like the Queen, her life. In my heart, only because I have always loved the Queen, she's never going to leave me. She's always going to be present somewhere in my life.
For those who live on in our hearts, they never die, and that's the case with the Queen. That you've absorbed what she's been
Mhm.
over the years, and she's part of your personality, part of your DNA in some weird way.
And we didn't always have your book with us, Andrew. And what I mean by that is, over here in America, we had the darn paparazzi that was always putting something up there about the Queen and the King and the kids and all that kind of stuff. But now we have a book where we can really physically go in there and experience what their lives were truly like.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that's the whole point of the book. It's actually trying to find the person, the real individual behind the myth, behind the yachts, behind the palaces, behind the palace gates, and that's certainly what I try and do with all my books, to try and bring the people to life.
70 years as queen. And the one thing I guess that really kind of what makes me want to keep going back in there and digging into the paragraphs is the fact that it didn't come so easy. I mean, she was once a quiet country girl who loved dogs and horses, but that all changed.
Absolutely right. I mean, she was shy as well. She was quite diffident. Her mother, the Queen mother, used to say to her, "Walk into the room like you own it," rather than kind of sidling in. She let her sister, Margaret, do all the kind of heavy conversational lifting. So, this book really also kind of is an exploration of how a personality develops and how somebody, as it were, inhabits the cloak of responsibility and authority. And you know, Elizabeth didn't she was a reluctant queen. She'd pray every night as a little girl, saying,
Mhm.
hoping that her mother would give birth to a baby boy who would jump over her in the line of succession. So for her, it was a daunting task, probably more daunting than say for you.
Mm. To sit down and share a cup of tea, what would be her first subject that she would bring up?
Guess what? Dogs or horses?
Oh, I love it.
Ian Balding, who's a well-known trainer in Britain, says that she had such a good eye for a fetlock and the pedigree of a horse, that she could have made a really good trainer herself if she'd had the time. So it's something that started very early with her. I mean, as a little girl, she would have all these wooden horses in her nursery, and she'd feed them, put the bridles on, give them a polish, take them for a little romp around the nursery. So that transferred into having her own horse when she was, or her own pony when she was 4 years old.
You being so close to the story and the actuality of their lifestyle, when you see things like The Crown or you see these movies that Hollywood is producing, do you just sit there and go, no, I'm sorry. I can't tune into this because I know what it was really like?
Well, what I always say is that, and it's a cliche, that the truth is stranger than fiction. And the whole point about fiction is that that when you're writing it, you've got to think, is this believable or not? But in real life, the stuff that goes on that's unbelievable, and that's the contrast. And it always makes me smile when I go to these premieres of films about, say, Diana or as you say, The Crown, and you watch it, and people are laughing at some of the dialogue, and you think to yourself, and I remember this vividly, and you think to yourself, that's all true. I remember Diana saying that to me.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
so so listeners, when you hear something about a new film or whatever, pay close attention to the dialogue.
Yeah. I've always thought that subliminally the Queen was always helping out the other women leaders around the world in the way that, she had to face some real hardcore things, such as men that weren't always faithful. And I always believed in my heart that Hillary Clinton reached out to her somehow, some way to talk about what she was going to go through being the First Lady of the United States.
Well, I'm surprised at that. I mean, the Queen was always very discreet,
Really?
particularly politically. Uh, but I think your point is well made about the early days of the Queen, where she was, one of the very rare individuals who was an executive, a female executive in a very male Mad Men
Yeah.
world of sexism and all the rest of it. And you see that in the fact that nobody in the government or in the royal household gave a thought to the fact that just a few months after the coronation, she had to go on a 6-month tour around Australia and New Zealand, and it was and leave her children behind. So, and she accepted this herself because she didn't want to seem to be weak. And I think she had quite a tough passage in those early years, um, and then Charles would later write saying that she was quite a cool mother, quite distant.
Mm.
Well, I think she. And by the way, her Charles's siblings, Anne, Edward, and Andrew, all told him that they totally disagreed with that. But nonetheless, it doesn't take away from the fact that she had a really tough start, and all this leaning in and assistance for female directors and CEOs that takes place today. This kind of group help
Mm-hmm.
wasn't around in 1953.
How did she stay so strong? I'm a daily writer. I journal. I defrag. I do everything in order to keep the inner core going when I face challenges. But I have not faced what the Queen Elizabeth has faced in her life. How did she stay? I mean, I realize she had her religion, but there was more than that, wasn't there?
Well, that's a very good point. There was the religion, and it sustained her. She was a straightforward Christian. She liked a good sermon, a good sing song. In fact, Diana used to say to me, "She's singing hymns at the end of a meal." uh, but but how did she stay strong? She used to do breathing exercises. The same woman who helped her give when she gave birth to Edward was called in from time to time. She might have the occasional martini, a little bit more than she would normally have, but she was not immune from this kind of stuff. I mean, there's a passage in the book with all these illicit tape recordings of Diana and Charles and Camilla and Fergie, and the Queen was just kind of literally pulling her hair out, saying, "When is this going to end? What are people trying to do to this family?" Because the kind of the negativity, you
Right.
didn't know where it was coming from. So she has been underwater, and quite famously in 1992, when she said, "This year has been my annus horribilis, my horrible year." And 3 of her children separated or divorced, and Windsor Castle burnt down. It was just a terrible year for her.
It just everything you're saying is like a vision back into the history and things like that of what we've gone through as well. It's almost like we watched the Queen of England grow up.
Yeah, it's a very good. I mean, the Queen was not static, and that is, I think, is the point I'd like to make through the book, is that she changed. She changed as a person, so
Yes.
that by the end of her reign, she was so relaxed and and really enjoying the job, actually, and jumping out of helicopters during the Olympics, having marmalade sandwiches with Paddington. It was, she showed a far more relaxed side than certainly in the early days, where she would say, I'll do it as my father did it. And then his father did it, her father did it as George V did it. So it was all very conservative, very constrained. And as she grew into the cloak of the job, as it were, she became more relaxed and more her own person.
I got to tell you what, Andrew, during the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, when she shared that message, I trusted her, I loved her, I embraced her, and I felt like she was the only one that was speaking the living truth to me when she sat there so calm and so peaceful and spoke to the people.
I couldn't agree with you more. That message, the "We'll meet again" message, where she spoke using the words, the famous Vera Lynn wartime song. I mean, still chokes me up today because people were watching it, fearful of their
Yep.
lives. Only the Queen could have delivered that message because she'd lived through the war. She'd lived through the privations of the post-war. And she'd had a full and difficult life herself, and so people respected what she had to say. And I think more than half the country watched it on television and gained a lot of succor from it.
Did
For me, it was one of the crowning moments of her reign.
did she have a great relationship with her prime ministers and things? Because first of all, I'm a big Margaret Thatcher fan. I'm not from England, and I don't understand why some did like her, some didn't. But I did like her, and I was hoping that the Queen of England did as well.
They her Thatcher's biographer says that Thatcher was way too deferential and could never really quite get to even though there was the same age,
Hmm.
never quite got to the pitch of what the Queen was about. And when, for example, there's that wonderful true scene, by the way, in The Crown, where she goes out walking in at Balmoral rather than wearing hiking boots. She's wearing black patent leather heels, and so she was not by no means a country person. I would say actually that Mrs. Thatcher was one of the prime ministers that the Queen got on least well with. But having said that, they both respected one another. The prime minister who obviously moulded her going forwards into her royal career was Winston Churchill,
Yes.
and their first meeting was daunting for her. I mean, here was this man who had a relationship with her father, war hero, Nobel Prize winner, um, international statesman, and here's this 25-year-old girl. And even Churchill was daunted by it. He just didn't think she would be up to the job. But eventually they had a really genuine, affectionate relationship, where the audiences would last for about an hour and a half, when they'd be talking about horse racing typically. Um, but one of the points I make in the book is that it wasn't all wine and roses, because Churchill didn't particularly like or have respect for Philip,
Hmm.
and he was protective of Elizabeth, but rather dismissive of Philip. And he, there are several conflicts in those early years that Churchill won, and I'm sure that puts something of a strain on the marriage of Elizabeth and Philip as well.
What did King Charles learn from his moments of not his mother but the Queen? The Queen, because when she's the Queen, I mean, was she still the same person as the mom?
Well, no, of course not. She once she's got the crown on and all the finery, she is, as you've mentioned, she is the queen. She's not down on her knees playing with
Hmm.
wooden bricks. And uh, Charles will have learned that, and he learned it. He learned what it's like to be a king or a queen gradually. And I think he once said, you don't wake up one morning when the milk bottles have been delivered and think, "Whoopee, I'm going to be king." It's a burden that gradually comes onto your shoulders. And I have to say, I think listeners will gather this by just looking at the Prince of Wales, the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. We've seen him in our lifetimes develop from this rather shy young man, kind of very self-conscious, to this individual who will stand in front of a crowd and make a speech, who has his own ideas, his own thoughts, and you can see that he is, and he has been trained over the years in duty, in service, and it's an integral part of his life. And I think it's the same with King Charles.
Wow. I loved the part in the book where the president of France asked the Queen if she was bored, and she said yes. I love that personality. She was so innocent at so many things and events.
Well, and who can blame her for being bored? I mean, there's all kinds of scenes where the Queen is making a speech at, say, the Milk Marketing Board or some widget company, and it's not what you might think of as a glamorous job. Everybody thinks, oh, the banquets and the balls and the crowns and the jewels and that's part of the theatre of monarchy. Mm-hmm. The day-to-day aspect of monarchy is quite routine. I said when Meghan Markle first joined the royal family, she'll find that the walkabout is a bit like the red carpet, but there's no red carpet. You're just walking on cobblestones and on a wet day, on a wet Tuesday in November, shaking hands with people that you don't know. I mean, it's an odd kind of job when you stand back and look at it, shaking hands with people that you don't know, who've been hanging and waiting for you for hours for a glimpse of you. It's definitely peculiar.
The book we're talking about is The Queen, Her Life. There's a story in this book that I didn't know about, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of listeners and readers that didn't know it either. But her trip to California, those 9 days, wow. And how did she keep it together?
Yeah, I started the book with that trip to California because for me it was a seminal moment in my own life, because I saw the Royal Yacht enter San Diego Harbor.
Yes.
And anybody who's seen the Royal Yacht, I mean, it's a beautiful piece of engineering. Well, not necessarily engineering, but just it's lovely lines and lovely shape and colors and things. And it's kind of reminds you of Edwardian splendor almost. And it was surrounded by yachts and skiffs and canoes and motorboats. And I thought, oh, I'd love to read about it. Anyway, I went on board the yacht. There was a cocktail party, met the Queen for the first time. But it was the yacht that I was more interested in, ironically, than the Queen. And I ended up writing my first book about it. So I have the Queen to thank for setting me on my literary career. And that trip up the coast of California was, if it was a Broadway show, it'd be called the visit that went wrong, because everything that could go wrong went wrong. There were tornadoes, there were floods, there was the rock falls. The Reagans had to cancel a meeting at their place in the hills. They ended up staying in a hotel, the West Inn, I think, in San Francisco, because they couldn't get the Royal Yacht up there because the weather was so bad. IRA demonstrators got through security and shouted at the Queen's face. Frank Sinatra sang. Oh, it was a roller coaster. I loved every minute of it, and actually that's the point. So did the Queen, because the Queen loved it when things went wrong. And in the exchange of letters between Reagan and the Queen, Reagan, profusely apologizes for the weather, and the Queen says, "Not a bit of it. It was great fun." And it's just one of those things about the Queen, and to a degree Prince Philip. When things go wrong, they absolutely love it.
The book I want to read, Andrew, is the one that's about you. I want to read that book because I want somebody to let me see as a reader what it was like for you to, when you were finally breaking free, to go get your good night's sleep and stuff like that, where you would go into a hotel room or a room and just put your hands through your hair, rub your eyes, and say, holy crap, how did I even make it through this day?
Well, join me on a book tour.
Yeah. And physically, yeah, because you're a silent watcher, aren't you? You watch in silence under the brush, and then you come and bring the story to the rest of us.
Well, yeah, but also you're trying to look beyond the obvious. You're trying to look like I'm described you the tour that went wrong and the Queen enjoying it. That gives you an insight into her character, and what you are effectively is a personality detective. You're there with your glass, trying to look at incidents and try and build them out into insights into the person's personality. You know, for example, when she goes walking or what used to go walking at Sandringham or at Balmoral, often she'd come across people who would say to her, "You do look like the Queen," and the Queen wouldn't let on. She'd just say, "How very reassuring," you know. But there's all, and that gives you a sense that she's almost like one of these character actors that can change facial expressions, hairstyle, and so on. You don't recognize them from one film to the next. And I think that was the Queen. She had that a bit. We can all picture her with this headscarf on, the corgis, the wellies, and the coat. But she was also able to change the way she looked so that people didn't recognize her. Yeah. So, you know, whereas, say, her sister Margaret was very theatrical and liked to be the center of attention, the Queen didn't. She was diffident in childhood, but also going forwards in life.
Wow. Please come back to this show anytime in the future, Andrew. The door is always going to be open for you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Will you be brilliant today, okay, sir?
I will. I'll be more than brilliant. I'll be outstanding.
I love it. Thank you, sir.